You came a long way from St. Louis. You climbed the ladder of success. I've seen the flashy foreign cars that were parked out in front of your fancy address. You came a long way from St. Louis.
Well, I don't know about that business about climbing the ladder of success in the lyric crooned by Perry Como there, but I did come a long way from St. Louis. That's true. And here we are in the sunshine state of Florida doing the radioactive take over WBQS News Talk Radio, a radio station that does not exist but maybe should, as we kick around the news, talking about everything in and out of the news, everything from astronomy to zoology, and we'll cover some astronomy on this edition of the Radioactive Take. And I got to tell you, we're only in our second week here on YouTube, and I resisted for the longest time, for over a decade. People said, you can't be on the radio anymore because local talk radio is not just drying up, it's dried up. So if you can't get back on the radio, why don't you do the YouTube thing? Various radio professionals have suggested to me over time, but I've always resisted it because, hey, I'm a radio guy. I don't do television, even though I did work at 4 different TV stations, 1 in Detroit and 3 in Chicago. But radio's my thing, and we're trying to bring some of the trappings of radio, hence the mic flag and the oversized mic and the oversized mouth on the so-called talent. We're trying to introduce some of the trappings of radio into a YouTube presentation. We'll see how it goes. I'm learning as I go. This is only the second week of the Radioactive Take, and we'll figure out how to do it eventually. But in the meantime, there's going to be some rough spots. You've probably already noted them if you've caught any previous editions of the Radioactive Take. But here we are on the 14th of August, Monday night. And, of course, the story in Maui continues to dominate the news. But one positive aspect of this, I think, is the fact that Norah O'Donnell has jetted into the Hawaiian archipelago and is practicing something that was called by a television critic at the Los Angeles Times, terrific writer, and knew how to coin a phrase. He called it anchors away, Howard Rosenberg did, when the thinking is that a story is so major that it can't be covered adequately with the anchors still in the studio in New York. Well, in the case of Norah O'Donnell, it would be Washington. She flew in from Washington to Maui and is now anchors away. But her 2 competitors, who I think are both decidedly inferior in presentation and in skill, and in just general journalistic credentials, Lester Holt at NBC and David Muir and ABC are still in their studios in New York, but Norah O'Donnell is on the ground in Maui. And the reason this has been criticized over the years, this anchors away business, is because it ends up brooming all of the already on the ground CBS coverage that would be filed by other reporters because they want to feature the star anchor. That's understandable. And in the case of Norah O'Donnell, I think it is just fine because she's a first-rate reporter as well as an anchor. And I'm glad to see her helping enlighten us all as to what the situation there in Maui is and how the cleanup is going. We're told that it's already the largest, not third largest, the largest in terms of body count, natural fire disaster in the last century and a quarter, something like that. The body count's already up to 3 digits, and we'll see how much it tops out at once they've finally doused all of the embers, some of which are still smoldering, we're told. So good luck to Norah O'Donnell and all the people dealing with that catastrophe in Hawaii. What else is also on my mind is the Bachelorette. We just had the penultimate edition of this season of the Bachelorette, when the men tell all, as they say. Gives the rejected bachelors a chance to give a little back to her being Charity Lawson, this season's Bachelorette. Now, I wouldn't date her. She's not my type. But the 25 or so guys that were introduced to her, they were all talking about dreaming of being married to her. And good luck to the 3 that remain. We'll see if a proposal comes out of it next week in the finale. But in a bunch of seasons of either The Bachelor or The Bachelorette franchise, they've not had proposals for one reason or another. And there's rumors that may be the case this time around. We'll see. But in the meantime, it's the men tell all. And Charity was on there. I have to check the clipboard to make sure I get her name right, because somebody on the show got it wrong. Some guy called her, one of the guests, not one of the bachelors, but another guest sitting in the audience that was featured earlier in the series. He called her Chastity instead of Charity, which seems to me is a pretty amusing mistake, and I'm sure raised some eyebrows in the audience. But anyway, it's Charity Lawson. And by the way, I've got a problem with Charity Lawson. It's not her look. She's perfectly lovely looking woman, and not as much of a dimwit as some of those bachelorettes have been. So I'll give her that. But what puzzles me about her is she has complained at least 3 times, maybe 4 times over the course of the season to various men she was interacting with. She's complained that I want to be seen. It's important for me to be seen. You got to make me feel like I'm being seen. And this is phraseology that's not unique to her. I've heard it from at least a couple of other previous bachelorettes. And maybe it's part of the vernacular now amongst the young folks in romantic encounters. They want to be seen. At least the women do, or say they do. And, of course, what makes me totally perplexed by this is why a woman who's the star of a hit show every Monday night on the ABC television network, being viewed by 20 million or more people, feels like she's not being seen. Makes no sense. And it would also suggest to me a certain emotional imbalance on her part that would make me steer clear of her if I was one of the bachelors invited to date her on the show. But they didn't call me. Nor did they call me to be the new Golden Bachelor, a fellow who was in his debut appearance here, the host, what's his name, Jesse Palmer, I guess, one-time quarterback briefly for the Cincinnati Bengals, I believe, but he's not a has-been in the NFL. He's a never was. But he's doing pretty well as a host. Not as well as Chris Harrison did, but you remember what happened to him. Had a little scandal that got him ushered out, and now it's Jesse Palmer. And Jesse Palmer was interviewing the Golden Bachelor, a guy by the name of, he spells it Gary, as in, or he spells it Jerry, I should say. Gerry, as in Jerry and the Pacemakers. Remember Jerry Marsden died about a year or 2 ago of Jerry and the Pacemakers. Ferry Cross the Mercy was their most familiar hit. That's the way Jerry Marsden pronounced it, but this guy who spells it Gerry, I gather pronounces it Gary. It sounded like they were pronouncing it Gary, as in Gary Lewis and the Playboys. Gary Lewis, a radioactive interviewee. I put the microphone in his face in Albuquerque, I think in 2004, and learned some very interesting things about his father, Jerry Lewis. And Jerry Lewis was alive at the time. So he may have been speaking close to the vest, but I'll tell you that story one of these days on the Radioactive Take. But anyway, however you pronounce his name, I think it's Gary. He's a restaurateur out of Indiana who married his high school sweetheart and had a couple of kids and a wonderful marriage, storybook marriage, we're told, in his telling. And you have no reason to disbelieve him. He comes across as a real true blue guy, this Gary does, the Golden Bachelor. And unfortunately, his wife died unexpectedly. Thought it was just a minor infection, but a couple of days or a few days later, she was dead. And now he's in the market for romance again. And good luck to him. And one thing that's encouraging about the interview that Jesse Palmer did with him is it sounds like the Golden Bachelor is uncomfortable with the overt sexual tone that franchise has taken over the last 3 or 4, 5 or 6, maybe all the way back to the first season. Not so. It was pretty tame early on when Trista was the original Bachelorette, and she made a return appearance here. She's about to celebrate her 20th anniversary of a happy marriage to that fireman in Colorado. And unlike a lot of the other bachelors and bachelorettes, she didn't use the show as a springboard to Hollywood stardom. She went back to anonymity in Colorado and has been living a wonderful life ever since. And good for her. And let's have all of the bachelorettes emulate her success. We'll see how it works out for Charity Lawson. But in the meantime, good luck to the Golden Bachelor coming up shortly on ABC. An obituary which caught my eye in the British press, I believe it was The Guardian that covered this late astronomer by the name of Bob Reed. He died at 92. And in December of 1988, he was down in Antarctica, I'm trying to say. And he was down there because he's not merely an astronomer, he's a cosmologist and has a specialty in cosmic rays. And there were all kinds of cosmic rays bombarding the southern hemisphere starting on the 23rd of February, 1987. That's why the supernova of that year is called the 1987A, because it was the first discovered that year and the only one in our galaxy. That's why it's called that. And that's why he jetted down or maybe sailed down to Antarctica to study those incoming cosmic rays, which started about 170,000 years ago in the Large Magellanic Cloud, which is one of 2 satellite galaxies. Actually, we've got, I think, a better part of a dozen small, by galactic standards, satellite galaxies, but the 2 main ones, the 2 ones everybody knows, and the 2 ones were first discovered on the Magellan voyage about 25 years after Columbus. Magellan sailed around the world, or would have if he would have survived, but one of his 5 ships did, and a lot of his crew, about 20 of his crew did. And on the way to getting back to Portugal, where they were sailing out of, and proving the world is round, it wasn't Columbus that proved that. It was, and by the way, astronomers knew, or certainly navigators knew, that the world was spherical, even back in the Middle Ages. In fact, ever since the ancient era, the Greeks knew that the world was spherical, but common people didn't. Educated people knew this, and mariners knew it because they had to in order to sail their ships effectively around the globe. And the Magellan voyage were the first ones to, or at least of Europeans, to see the Magellanic Clouds. That's why they're called the Magellanic Clouds, those 2 satellite galaxies which orbit our own in different orbits. And this supernova, this star, collapses and explodes about 170,000 years ago, because that's how many light years distant the Large Magellanic Cloud is. And both Magellanic Clouds, as well as the closest star system to our own, that would be Alpha Centauri. You've heard of that many times. They're all pretty much straight up over the South Pole. and you can't see them if you don't get considerably south of the equator. And you're not looking straight up at them unless you're at the South Pole. So that's why Bob Reed, the astronomer from the UK, went down to Antarctica. But he's also was a whimsical sort of a fellow, and also happened to have an interest in boomerangs. He was a member of the British Boomerang Society. Now, you might expect the Australians to have a boomerang society, but I wouldn't have thought so necessarily in the UK, but they do. And he, as a member of that group, took one of his boomerangs down to the South Pole with him. And in between studying the cosmic rays incoming from the Large Magellanic Cloud, one day in December 1988, that would be the summer down in the southern hemisphere. So it was daytime. He wasn't doing this in the dark. He went outside and flung a boomerang around the South Pole. He's right-handed, so he did it with his right hand. There's a photograph of him doing it in The Guardian there. And what's interesting about this is, though the boomerang only stayed in the air 9 seconds, technically, that's the word the Guardian used, technically it was aloft for 24 hours and 9 seconds because it traversed 24 time zones before returning to him. I don't know if he caught it. If he was a real skilled boomeranger, he probably did catch it. I had a boomerang when I was a kid, but I never got it to come back, never once. Well, I didn't know how to throw it. That was my problem. But this guy, as a member of the British Boomerang Society, certainly did, and successfully circumnavigated the pole with his boomerang. And if that's not a record that the Guinness Book of World Records recognizes, maybe it ought to be, because it was quite a stunt, and it made me regret that I had never noticed Bob Reed's name. And I follow astronomy, but I wasn't familiar with him until reading his obituary, and I did want to note his passing at age 92. So that will do it for this edition of the Radioactive Take over WBQS News Talk Radio. And I'll do it again tomorrow. I hope you'll be part of the audience. And we'll be here every day this week, and as long as stamina allows, we'll be propagating conversation at the speed of light on a narrowcast right here on YouTube. See you tomorrow. That's a wrap from Florida. I'm Brian Steibel, signing off for WBQS News Talk Radio.